So today we're going to take a quick demo of how to add your own CSS and JavaScript to any core block. So really any block at all. If a block is loading and you want some CSS or some JavaScript to load, but you want to take advantage of what WordPress does, which is, if a block's not being used, it doesn't load the CSS or JavaScript for it. So you want to use kind of that feature, but you want to add your own CSS file or JavaScript file to a specific block to have it load. We're going to walk through that process. And so what I have here is two example files. I have a JavaScript file and a CSS file, and we'll just use them as examples. They're not like the best examples. The CSS file literally just adds a background color to the button block. It's just so we can kind of see that it's working. And then we have a JavaScript file that's literally just going to, console log something out. So it's not really, a super practical use case in these examples, but this is something that kind of gets done a lot of time. And so there's a few different things to keep in mind. So our plan here is that whenever somebody adds a button block to the page, we want to have a piece of JavaScript that gets added, into WordPress, and we want to have a piece of CSS that gets added. And there's a few things to keep in mind. We're going to start with the JavaScript, but what's really important about the JavaScript is that the JavaScript is only going to be on the front end of our website. So let's go over to the front end. This is what the page looks like. You'll see here there's no buttons anywhere on the page. So if I jump into the console, that's where I would see it. I'll zoom in a little bit. Nothing comes out on the console. So what we want to basically say is, hey, if there is a button on the page, run this piece of JavaScript. So let's make a new function and we'll just call it register custom JavaScript. And really, this is pretty basic. We're just going to register a piece of JavaScript. So, when you enqueue a script in WordPress, there's like the WP enqueue script function. We're going to use a similar one called WP register script. What this does is it tells WordPress that a piece of JavaScript exists, but it doesn't actually load it on the front end. It's just kind of letting WordPress know, hey, this is a piece of JavaScript, load it if I ask for it later. So here we've filled it out. Here's the name of our script. We're just calling it example block assets. We're going to need that name later. We're going to reference the URL of where to find that JavaScript file. There's no dependencies. Do a little quick versioning with the file time on the file, and true loaded in the footer. That's fine. And we're just going to add this to the WP enqueue scripts hook, just like we would in any theme or plugin where you're going to register scripts. And so this means that there's no button, the script is registered, but it's not going to actually load on the front end. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually filter the block. Now what we're going to do is we're going to filter the button block and add it to the block.json array of the button block. So for reference, this is the block.json file. This is actually coming from Gutenberg core. This is for the buttons block. We're actually going to do the buttons block, like the container, instead of the individual button block. In either case, they both show up. So in here, this is the block.json, and it does things like tells them what style sheet to load in the block editor and what style sheet to load on the front end. And there's another attribute here called view script that there's nothing set to it now, but we're going to use that view script attribute, and we're going to add our JavaScript and say, hey, when you're viewing it on the front end, load this piece of JavaScript. So we're going to make a new function where we're going to filter that block.json file. They call it the metadata here because we just like to call it something different in different places. It's going to be the block type metadata filter. And let's just pass our namespace. You definitely don't have to use namespaces. I just find that I kind of like them. Oops, we just need this function name here. And since it's a filter, we know at the end of the day, it needs to return metadata. So what's going to happen here is every time block.json gets parsed for every single block, this is going to run and it's going to filter that block.json. And so what we want to do is basically add ours if it's the core button blocks. So the first thing we need to do is make sure that the name is core/buttons. And that would be this right here, right? So we want to match that name and say, hey, if this is the name, then run our logic. And if so, what we want to do is we're going to edit the view script because that's the attribute that basically says, hey, load some JavaScript. Now, the funny thing about view script is that it can be an array of strings. So it could be like, hey, open this file, open this tag, open this, whatever, or it could just be one string. And a lot of times it's one string by default. So what we need to do is kind of basically deal with it being multiple strings. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to do an array merge, and we're going to typecast the original metadata view script. We're basically going to say, let's start with an array. So what we're basically, it's a little tricky here. What we're saying is if there's a view script already, then make sure it's set as an array. So that way, if it's just one string, it'll like turn it into an array for us. And if there's nothing there, like this is completely unset, then just return an empty array. And then we are going to pass our array. And what's in our array is basically the name of the script right here. And that's it. So it's going to take, if there's anything in the original view script, it's going to make sure it's an array. It's going to merge it with our array, or it'll just pass this. And so now the block metadata will be updated. So let's jump over to here. Now, if we do a quick check, again, no console log. Let's go back to our page. Now we've added some example buttons. Let's save the page. So now when we reload it, there should be buttons on the page. Our JavaScript should run. And look at there, it console logs out exactly what we asked it to do. So now the buttons block basically is always going to load this JavaScript anytime it's loaded on the page. So that's the kind of quick and easy way to get JavaScript loaded with any sort of block. Now, CSS is a little bit different. With JavaScript, like we pretty much only ever want it on the front end. If you're trying to do JavaScript like inside the block editor, that's way outside the scope of this video. That's really kind of like a long, complicated thing. So that we're not going to do. CSS, on the other hand, typically when you load CSS for a block, it actually loads it on the front end and the back end because CSS is a little bit easier. I will say sometimes it's a little tricky getting the back end to look perfect, but like it's generally you want that CSS on the front end and the back end. So we've made a CSS file that's basically just going to take the buttons and make the background color red. And, you know, this isn't something you'd normally do. You just use the block editor for that, but we're just doing it so we can easily see our changes. Okay, so let's make a new function. Register custom CSS. We're just going to hook in a little earlier. We're going to hook in on the init. And pass the name. So when WordPress initializes, we're going to say register this custom CSS. So we're actually going to do the same thing where we're going to call WP register style. And we're going to pass the same thing. We're going to make a name for our style sheet, pass it all the appropriate parameters and everything. Okay, so I've named my new style sheet example block assets. I'm pointing to that CSS file that was in our plugin. I don't have any dependencies for it, and I just did a little version based on the file time. So we've just registered this piece of CSS, and right now it's just registered. It's not going to load anywhere. But for style sheets, there's actually a nice core function called WP-enqueue block style. And what's nice about this is instead of having to like filter the metadata, which we could do the same thing here and update the styles attribute for the block.json. But since they give us a nice little handy function, let's just use it. The block name is core/buttons. And this is where it's a little bit weird. It basically wants an array of arguments for the second parameter. And it basically wants the same things that you can get in here, but because it's an array and not a function, you have to kind of name them as well. So what I usually do is I just do the handle, and that's example block assets. And that's really all I need, because you could actually skip this step and pass each individual parameter. Like you could say, here's the source, here's this, here's that. That's definitely an option, but I just find it easier to use WP register style. And what's nice about that is we can take a look at Query Monitor and show how it's working too. Okay, so let's refresh. So now our button block has that red background for it. And if I go to the block editor, it's going to load that style sheet here as well. So I get to see it in both contexts, which is really nice for CSS. And so the last thing I'll add is sometimes you're just not sure if you're seeing what you're supposed to be seeing. And that's where Query Monitor comes in. It's where you can debug a lot of different things. So I'm going to open query monitor. I'm going to go to scripts. I'm going to scroll down, and if you look right here, I can see that my example block assets script is being loaded. So that's something that's available coming from my plugin. And so if you're not seeing the effects of it, come down here and make sure it's actually getting loaded, because if it's just registered and not in queued, it won't show up here. Similar with my style sheet, I can scroll on down and I can see example block assets. That's what we named our style sheet. That CSS file is being loaded. So this is a good final way to kind of do some like debugging, checking, make sure that like everything is actually loading where you need it to load. So that's basically it. I'm going to push this code up to GitHub, but it's pretty simple, registering some scripts, registering styles. One additional thing that's super handy about this is, say you have a piece of JavaScript that's like a dependency for multiple blocks. Like say you're using a slider library or a countdown library, something like that, one piece of JavaScript, and you want it to just load once if it's ever being used by any block, and then not load a bunch of other times, or not load multiple copies of the same JavaScript file, that sort of thing. That's where register script comes in handy, because then you can start adding it to multiple blocks doing this. You can put it in multiple Block.json files. You can make one style sheet and enqueue it to multiple different types of blocks. So that way it only loads if those blocks are on the page, but it's not loading the same thing multiple times. There's a lot of benefits here to like learning and understanding the system and really tying all of your assets to the individual blocks to get that like more performant site in the long run. So let me know if you have any questions, like this video if this was helpful, and put anything you need in the comments below.